Welcome back to another conversation here on the couch. It's Jordan and Adrian. We're going to talk about something that could be very painful for you, or it has happened to you, or someone close to you.
Yeah, we're talking about cheating today, and when somebody steps out in a relationship that should be characterized by faithfulness and commitment
and trust.
In the context of marriage, we would call that adultery.
Yeah.
And the big question here is, can you come back from that? Can you survive that? And should you stay in that relationship, or should you get out of that relationship? So stay tuned. We're going to be talking about this rather serious topic today. Okay, so challenging topic today, maybe not quite as many laughs as we normally have when we sit together and talk on the couch, because we're talking about something that's very painful. We're talking about the fracturing and the breaking of a relationship that where two people have given themselves to one another in the expectation of faithfulness. The experience of adultery is something that leaves scars. I mean, for somebody who's been betrayed, we're talking about words like anger,
bitterness,
hatred,
even
could become hatred. Absolutely. There are going to be nights of self-doubt and of weeping and of tears. There is going to be incredible pain in the midst of this whole thing. And then we haven't even introduced the idea of children. Right? So this is a very hard thing. When adultery happens, you come to a fork in the road, and now the choice becomes, do we want this relationship to survive, or does this relationship end? If we want the relationship to continue, then we have to consider the big F word, forgiveness. Right? And what does that look like, and how does that work? But I'm going to suggest, guess what, that even if you decide the relationship is over, that forgiveness is going to be critical to be able to move on.
The F word still needs to happen.
Absolutely.
So that's important. We need to be able to forgive. So forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that it's condoning the actions that have happened. But forgiveness is saying, I forgive you. It's the building block to be able to start that journey into reconciliation and what that might look like. We'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, well, we're releasing the person, aren't we? We're releasing the person from our judgment, from our condemnation, from our desire to heap vengeance upon them, to tear them down and rip their reputation apart and get even, right?
So it releases them, but it can also release ourselves.
And that's why I was saying it has to happen even if you are not going to continue in the relationship, because if you don't forgive, the alternative is you carry them on your back for the rest of your life.
So you're choosing a life sentence of bitterness and hatred against this person that has wronged you.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to live in that atmosphere of resentment and always looking back, right, to what has happened. So I don't want to make out like forgiveness is an easy thing. I think it's actually a divine supernatural act that has to happen in our heart as we come before God. But we have to acknowledge that whether this relationship is going to be restored or remain broken forever, the only pathway to freedom is through the road of forgiveness.
Absolutely.
And then forgiveness opens the possibility, if our choice is that we want to stay in this relationship and see it restored, then forgiveness opens the door to reconciliation. Reconciliation being a word that means the restoring, the coming back together of a broken relationship. So forgiveness is a one-way street. I don't need to be asked for forgiveness. I don't need to see the other person deserving of forgiveness. It is my choice to release them into the hands of God instead of me being their judge, jury, and executioner for the rest of their life and my life.
So forgiveness can happen whether they say sorry or not.
Must happen whether they say sorry or not, right?
I get you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's that one-way street. But then, for the relationship to be restored, there has to be a movement from the other side. And that's what we call reconciliation. So I'm giving my forgiveness, whether you want it or not, but our relationship can only be restored once you actually choose to receive that forgiveness and to make restitution, to change, to bring processes into our relationship that restore confidence and trust and the like. So we've got a fractured relationship. Forgiveness creates the openness to restoration, and when the other person responds, then that actual healing, that coming back together can occur.
Yeah, so it's like that example of a broken bone.
Yes.
And when a broken bone happens, there's a fracture, that it's a clean break, but when that bone heals, and those two parties, those two fragmented bits have to come back together, but once healing or reconciliation takes place, that bone in the place of its break is actually stronger there than it ever was before.
Wow, great analogy. I love the fact you're actually bringing hope in there, that if you do choose to stay in a relationship, as long as those two bones are set right, right? As long as the right conditions are there for the right kind of healing, that bone is not going to forever be weaker than it was. It can actually become stronger than it was. And the same thing in our marriages. Like that is a tremendous vision of hope for anybody who has experienced this kind of relational interruption.
Yeah, and people have shared that with us as pastors, that they've had these broken relationships, but they've found that their relationship has become stronger, more deep, more intimate after, not saying that this needs to happen to produce that, but they are able to grow back together in a tighter and more knit relationship coming back from
so let's get stuck into that. I mean, that's what we want to know, right? Is if we've experienced this, we've spoken about the essential starting point, it would being forgiveness, right? But I mean, now we have to think about rebuilding trust and rebuilding intimacy between the married parties. Like, the first step I would envision there is that third party is cut out of this relationship. Like,
never was welcome.
Absolutely. An intruder has been removed, okay? So they were invited in by one of the marriage partners, and now they need to be put back out firmly, clear boundaries put in place. That is the starting point. Without that, you have a no-go.
Yeah. So by the throwing out of that unwelcome third party, just as that third party may have brought disruption to that marriage relationship, possibly in the process of reconciliation and restoring that relationship, it could be valuable to bring a welcome third party into that relationship. So that could be in the form of a counselor. It could be a pastor, a trusted friend, someone that they are welcome there to, again, provide accountability.
Invited by both of the marriage partners.
Mutually inviting them back in. It's the doctor that's helping them to join back together, though we know that God is the master physician in all of these broken relationships.
I love that. I love that idea. So an extra set of eyes on the relationship, someone to help navigate those very difficult conversations that are going to happen, someone asking wise questions that will help us to know our own hearts and to figure out where this whole thing fell apart, because adultery doesn't typically happen in an instant overnight. There's a process of breakdown between the married couple, and I believe there's a process of breakdown in the heart of the one who has committed adultery with their God. Okay, because when we got married, we did so in the presence of God. We took those vows, and a successful marriage union is a marriage of a man, a woman, and the God of those relationships, right? The one who gave marriage to us. And so if adultery has happened, there's going to be a way in which restoration, a spiritual restoration, should be effected as well. So we've got this idea of perhaps getting outside help. We've got this idea of definitely cutting off that unwelcome relationship. Clear boundaries being put in place. We've got this idea of spiritual restoration needing to happen alongside the horizontal direction of a marital relationship, right? And I would say, in addition to that, the willingness to be brutally honest, 100% transparent, the willingness for the person who has committed adultery to be scrutinized, as it were, to have all the hard questions asked by their marriage partner.
And be able to take responsibility for their actions.
No excuses, no blame shifting, right? There may have been contributing factors. But at the end of the day, they made the choice that they made, and we would want to see that is owned, right? So no blame shifting, no excuses, none of that kind of stuff. And I would say that, transparency should be exemplified even in the willingness to communicate with the spouse where I'm going, why I'm coming home late if that's the case. The willingness to open my devices and let whatever communications are happening between me and other people to
open the old phone.
Yeah, that's right.
And the passcode.
Yeah, and the thing is, we would hope that as you restore trust and intimacy, in the long run, the willingness to trust, the willingness to stop looking over the shoulder, all of that should return.
Absolutely, because when trust has returned, you're not going to continually have to be going in, checking their emails, checking their texts.
In fact, if that's still happening years and years down the line,
that's a problem.
I'm going to be very worried, because I think one of the things that can destroy the rebuilding of a relationship that's been fractured like that, it's not only that the person who has committed adultery might do that again. Of course, that would be, catastrophic.
Sure.
But in fact, that the person who has been betrayed almost redefines the relationship now as being on their terms. In other words, in a subtle way, they are holding that past failing over their spouse, and that spouse will never be free and never truly be trusted. Never be back in the circle of trust because of what they've done. And so if we have truly forgiven, and if the necessary things have taken place to actually build trust and intimacy again, we should get to a place where, as I say, we are not only back to where we were, but better than where we were, and that looks like full, unquestioning trust once again.
Wow, that's some powerful healing, and this is the hope that we have, is that the God that we believe in, He is a God about healing and restoring relationships, isn't He?
Absolutely.
That's the narrative that we see in the Scriptures.
Adultery is likened to what happens between us and God when we choose sin. When we choose sin, when we side with Satan and his character, we are committing adultery against God. We are
stepping out on God, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. So He knows that pain, and what we see in the example of Scripture is that despite that betrayal, He moves towards us with forgiveness.
Wow.
And if we will receive that by faith, then we are reconciled. So His forgiveness on the cross is a one-way street. He dies for the whole world, regardless of whether we'll accept it or not. He has forgiven us.
That's right.
But having been forgiven, it's important that we receive that forgiveness and move towards Him as He has moved towards us. He embraces us. Will we embrace Him? And when that happens, that's when this, in Christian talk, salvation happens. And I guess the reason why I'm going into this is because I think it's important that we understand that what we see God doing for us is the standard of what we're called to do for others. And in the way that the gospel and marriage is paralleled in Scripture, we realize that the way God treats us in salvation, in the plan of salvation, is the blueprint, if you like, for a healthy marriage. And especially when there's been breakdown, especially when there's been the loss of trust and intimacy and betrayal, what does it look like to forgive, to be reconciled? Follow the example we see in the gospel, the way God treats us. He forgives us regardless, but then it is up to us to receive that forgiveness. And if we do, we come into a new relationship where we grow together in intimacy and in trust and in transforming power, and things become better than what they were before. And so I think there's incredible hope for any broken marriage where the two individuals are willing to surrender their individual hearts to God and then make God the center of that marital relationship again. You do not need to limp through life together forever. You will run together.
As a team.
Absolutely.
Fully restored again.
Absolutely.
That's the hope that we have.
Three-legged race, our legs tied together, no stumbling, no falling, in perfect unison with one another. Like that is what God can do for us in our marriage relationship. So adultery is not necessarily the end. When Jesus said that adultery was one reason, along with death, as to why a marriage could legitimately end, He wasn't saying if your partner commits adultery against you, cheats on you, that you must break up. He recognized there are circumstances where once that has happened, maybe a relationship can't be restored because it's a two-way street.
That's right.
But the ideal that we see in the way God treats us and in the gospel is that it can be restored.
So we're not necessarily saying that you must or have to stay when those trusts are broken, but that it's possible.
Absolutely.
Through the healing power of God, it is possible.
We cannot prescribe to anybody. There's a whole lot of complicated factors here, and every person's going to have to decide for themselves. But it is not like God is commanding us to give up and walk out. In fact, what we see in His example, is the desire to reconcile. And as long as both parties in the relationship are willing to do that and move together with all these things we've been talking about, there is a good chance that they can come out stronger, better, happier, healthier, more intimate, and more trusting of one another than the early days of their marriage.
Wow, that is such a beautiful picture. You know, this gives me hope, you know, and I hope this can bring hope into your life as you're listening to this conversation. Maybe you've gone through one of these ultimate betrayals, a breaking of trust, a broken relationship. There's hope for you.
I hope not, but maybe.
Yeah. And if it has been, if you have gone through this and you have some words of advice or encouragement that you'd like to share, I invite you to put those comments below.
Whichever side of that tragedy you've been on, whether you have been the one who has been betrayed or whether you have been the one who has betrayed someone else, if you have words of wisdom, if you have counsel that you'd like to share with our viewers as they scroll through the comments, please feel free to do that. We'd love to learn from you, we'd love to grow together, and we'd love that constructive counsel to be added to what we've shared here today. So, thank you for joining us on the couch today. Do all that wonderful stuff we do on YouTube. Find someone to share this with. Click the like, the subscribe, and all those cool things. And we will see you soon on the couch again.